the classic underachiever. But when I first came to work for the legislature many years ago, Dick Durbin was of course on staff. He was the parliamentarian. And so even among staff then, he was a legend. So we kind of knew he was he was destined for great things. But it's a pleasure to be here today. Having come to work in Springfield in 1979, we had known about Pat Quinn. You know, it's interesting, everybody talks about the Republicans are running around trying to claim that they're outsiders. You know, you can be an insider and not necessarily hold elected office. There's a way of buying your way inside the tent, so to speak. But Pat was the consummate outsider. Pat was someone who was trying to initiate and force reforms through the referendum process. We all know the Citizens Utility Board and so many of Governor Quinn's initiatives. So we had known about Pat, and I had an opportunity to meet Pat back then, and I've known the governor for about 30 years. I also had the pleasure of working with many of the individuals that Pat attracted to the government. Sometimes you identify it, sometimes you can measure a person's strength and the quality of the person and the people that he attracts to government. And there are many individuals who he's brought to government, some of whom actually worked for me from time to time. And he always seemed to attract the best and the brightest, the true testimony of the quality of the man. So the opportunity to come in the invitation to be his lieutenant governor was an honor, and it was something that I enthusiastically embraced because I know what type of man he is, and he's a man that's easy to follow because he's a leader, and Governor Quinn always does the right thing. I also like to think that Governor Quinn selected me in part because of my background. You know, I lived in Palos Heights. If you drive by the house, you'll notice it. It has a big flagpole, and there's a Navy flag there for my son, who's a Navy corpsman, and just returned after 5 years of active duty, including a year in Afghanistan as a combat medic for the 5th Marines. And there's another flag there, and that's the Marine Corps flag for my second son, Marine Corps reservist. And those flags have been hanging. My wife was a police officer in Palos Heights. My father was the mayor of Palos Heights. Now, since I ran for governor many years ago, I've taken on a number of projects. I've gone when I've been asked to go to help. Senator Mary Landrieu, who also has a very tough race down in Louisiana, always a target down there, always seems to squeak by. A legendary leader in the Senate. You can ask Dick Durbin the value and the importance she is to the Democratic Party. And of course, Governor Bianco asked me to come. Governor Bianco asked me to come to New Orleans to help rebuild the New Orleans school system. And of course, after the earthquakes in Haiti and Chile, the international community invited me or asked me to come to those two countries and help rebuild their schools. So I have taken on those assignments while obviously continuing to live in Chicago, and of course my family continued to be there too, although I always had at least one boy with me. My wife and I always joked that she always sent me the one that she was having the biggest challenges with, you know what I mean? My oldest helped me in New Orleans. My youngest obviously spent time with me in Haiti. But I took on those assignments because I love public service, and that's what Pat Quinn is about, and that's what so many of you are about. But we take these public service jobs because we want to make a difference. I also like to think that Pat selected me because I've been balancing billion-dollar budgets. Let me point out that in the Chicago Public Schools, as a budget director, in the Chicago Public Schools and later in the other districts I've had, I probably negotiated, I don't know, maybe 2 dozen collective bargaining agreements. I don't think there's a time when I never gave raises. I don't think there's a time when I ever cut benefits. And I know there's never been a time when we've ever underfunded the pension system. When I was at Chicago Public Schools, our pension system was fully funded. The teachers had 6 consecutive years of raises. We didn't close schools. And we left the school district with $330 million budget surplus. We also did $3 billion in school construction, so we put people to work. So I think it's those type of accomplishments that attracted me to Pat, and Pat's selection of me and his invitation for me to join the ticket It was a reflection of the fact that he wanted somebody to partner with him so that we can bring financial stability to the state, so that we can invest in our children's future, so that we can find ways to build upon the infrastructure programs that the governor has begun, so that we can, in effect, create a strategy for building a prosperous future for the state of Illinois. You know, Pat Quinn inherited the perfect storm. He became governor during the perfect storm. There were really three storms. The first storm was the pattern and the practices of the state to defer obligations to the future. Whether it was bills, whether it was the funding of the pension system, whether it was deferring the needed infrastructure investments. There was always pushing these things off to the future. And that was the first storm. And then the second storm hit, and that was the Great Recession, which for many of us and for many communities was the equivalent to a depression. You see, when the economy is booming, it kind of covers up the flaws that exist in your failure to invest, your failure to budget wisely, your failure to fund mandates. But when the economy slows, and indeed when the economy contracts, it brings the crisis. The crisis becomes an immediate crisis. So we have the practices, meaning the recession, and then meeting the political vacuum that existed because two of our governors have been sent to prison. The absence of leadership. And it's easy to blame the legislature and to talk about divisions within the legislature, but at the end of the day, the executive branch is there to lead. The executive branch is there to guide. So Governor Quinn, the reformer, found himself in those circumstances. Has there been a worse time than existed when the governor came in? There hasn't been. There hasn't been. Not in decades have you had that type of a situation where bad practices and a severe, almost depression-like conditions, and then that political vacuum. And what the governor did was the governor really did three things. And I'm a history teacher. I'm a history teacher, and so I always look at history. I always look at patterns. Governor Quinn has a flaw: modesty. And that is a flaw that you sometimes can't have when you're an elected official, because you have to talk about what you've done. And he has a real problem talking about what he's done. Obviously, he doesn't get really enthusiastic about it. He instead wants to talk about what he still needs to do. I've known him for years, and he's always had that pattern. He's a very, very modest man. But when you look at what he's done, the first thing the governor came in and did was to stop the bleeding. He immediately started funding pensions again. He immediately stopped borrowing. In fact, he paid off the old borrow. He immediately began to bring down the unpaid bills. He immediately began to stabilize the funding for critical human service needs and obviously for education. So the idea was not to make things worse, to stabilize the patient, so to speak. And then the second thing he did was realizing that we were in the throes of the depression-like conditions, was we needed to put people to work. We needed to stimulate the economy. So Governor Quinn and the legislature and the legislative leaders constructed the largest capital construction program in the state's history, $31 billion. $31 billion. How many jobs did that create? How many jobs did that create through the multiplier effect? How many jobs did that preserve? That critical investment that benefited areas all over the state. It even built a second campus for my alma mater, Western Illinois University. How many jobs did that create? And just not the importance of investing to create jobs, but investing to secure our future. When you you're making those investments, you only compound the cost down the road. And then the third thing the governor did, and probably the most difficult thing, was he moved to attack the cost drivers. The size of government. Do you know that the expenses on governmental operations today are the same as they were in 2008? So he brought governmental spending, not the cost of programs, but the cost of government under control. The second thing was to negotiate contracts that you could afford. Because there's nothing worse than negotiating a contract and then not even being able to sustain the contract. So the last contract negotiations actually generated a savings because of changes in savings on the healthcare side. And then the third And then the third was Medicaid. Beginning to reform and to bring Medicaid expenditures under control. It's projected that the reforms that the governor has been able to enact with the support and in partnership with the legislature could save anywhere from $1 billion to $2 billion, bringing Medicaid under control. And then the fourth, and obviously the one that will have the greatest long-term impact has been the pension reform. They're very controversial and painful pension reform that will save the state $160 billion over the next 30 years. It takes guts to do those type of things. It takes guts for a Democratic governor to do those type of things. But Pat Quinn always tries to do what is necessary. His whole life has been about that, regardless of the political consequences. We get elected to sometimes do things that may sacrifice our careers, that may sacrifice our futures. Because as Phil Rock used to tell me, when people used to criticize him for, they always felt that he wasn't strong enough from opponents within his caucus. Don Clark, not just too independent. You've got to get the crazy eights in line. He used to call them the crazy eights. Vince DiMuzio and Phil Rock, you all remember. Or you're doing too much to work with Governor Thompson. And Rock said, when I got started, Phil Rock said, 10% of the time we do politics and 90% of the time we do government. And that's what it's about. And if we can't do that, we have no business. We have no business running for elected office. And he realized that. Pat Quinn always tries to do the right thing. And by doing the right thing, by the senators and representatives in this audience supporting the governor and collectively doing the right thing, you have stabilized the patient. You have brought Illinois back from the abyss. And we now have an opportunity to move the state forward. The governor delivered his State of the State. And in the governor's State of the State, he really talked about three things. He talked about, one, bringing stability and predictability to the governmental process so that businesses know what the cost of doing business is going to be, so that working families know what they're going to be, what type of supports they're going to have, what government is going to do for them, so that governmental agencies, education, school districts, municipalities know what their resources are going to be. In other words, let's bring some stability and let's bring some consistency to government. The second thing was investment. The governor talked about investing in infrastructure. $31 billion is not enough. More needs to be done to repair the infrastructure of the state. But he also talked about investing in education, finding a way to get funding back to 100%. Stop prorating the funding for elementary, secondary education. Restore the community college funding. Invest in early childhood education so that we can intervene at the earliest possible age when the intervention will have the most profound impact on a child's life. And then the governor, in his message, talked about fairness, raising the minimum wage, the increases in the earned income tax credit, the importance of expanding health care. There's 144,000 more people in health care today than were a year ago. Now, if people say that that's going to cost, imagine what the cost would be if those individuals ended up in the ER, ended up in the emergency treatment centers because of the absence of health care, the absence of that preventive care. Just imagine what the cost would be. We're going to be paying in triplicates and quadruplicates. We're going to be paying much more because of our failure to provide that intervention. That's what the governor is about. The governor talked about laying out a 5-year blueprint for the state. The governor asked for a delay in the budget message. Why? Because he doesn't want to propose a single-year stopgap budget. In an election year, you don't want to do a stopgap budget. Isn't it an election year where you're supposed to kick all the issues all the tough decisions into the next election year? No. He wants to present to the public a 5-year blueprint for bringing long-term financial stability to the state, for making the critical investments we need to move the state forward, and to lay out the type of progressive agenda that can that can ensure that government is providing for those who are most in need, are providing for the working families, are providing for the small businesses. We want to lay out an agenda that spells out what we're about and who we are and where our values lie. That's what this is about. That's why the governor has asked for the additional time. We don't want to wait until post-election. We want to lay the foundation during the election and let the public decide. Because in this election, it's got to be about what are we going to do to maintain the long-term stability of the state? What are we going to do to get all of our bills paid? What are we going to do to stop prorating the funding of elementary and secondary education, which only raises our local taxes, because when the state funds less, the locals have to pay more. What are we going to do to build and strengthen our community college system, which is becoming so critically important for immediate job training and job skills? What are we going to do to continue to expand healthcare coverage so that we're not paying at the back end because we're investing in healthcare at the front end? Or what are we going to do to provide the early intervention that we need so that we're helping children have an opportunity for a quality of life, and we're not, because of our failure to provide them with the early intervention, doing them or disadvantaging them for life. Just look at one simple initiative. One simple initiative is Cradle to the Classroom initiative. You know, I was talking to the representatives from the Hospital Association, and he said, do you know that that the hospitals pay about $250 million a year more for the cost of childbirth for children who are born to Medicaid-eligible mothers who have not had prenatal care? $250 million more. I think it's like $3,000 more per birth. Think about that for a second. Well, what if we found a way through Cradle to the Classroom of providing prenatal care to everyone? What if we wed Medicaid with our schools and went out and identified those who are at risk? Multiply that savings over 30 years. You're getting into the billions of dollars. But more importantly, look at the statistics. When a child is born with major medical problems, how many become special ed? How many need long-term medical services from the state? How many will struggle economically and will be forced to become, to be in a position where, well, they'll have to receive some sort of public assistance or public aid indefinitely? How many will drop out of school? How many will be classified as special education? How many will be in need of, how many will end up in the criminal justice system? Believe it or not, when you look at those categories, it multiplied times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5, times 8. So this simple initiative is not just about providing children with an opportunity for quality of life. It's about driving down those type of expenses at the back end because we have sense enough to provide the investment at the front end. That's what PAC Point is about. It's about planning for the future. So I'm excited to be a part of this ticket. But Toni Preckwinkle at an earlier event said that as a history teacher, she always says to her class that democracy is both the best and the most fragile form of government. And the fragility comes from the fact that it's a participatory democracy. If you don't participate, you don't benefit from the democracy. This election is going to be about participation. This election is going to be about who's going to get their voters to the poll. This is an off-year election, meaning we have got to get our voters to the polls. But we also need to give our voters something to rally around, something to be enthusiastic about. Because have you been watching the debates? It's like reality TV. Think about it for a second. Has anything substantive come out of the debates? Nothing, and nothing will. If you don't know how you're going to fix the state before the election, we can't trust you with the future of the state after the election. That's what it's about. So we're going to present our agenda, and we're going to defy them to even come close to matching the vision and to matching our priorities, and to matching the progressiveness, and to matching our strategy for helping working families, and for helping generate jobs, and for helping give everyone in the state of Illinois the educational and economic opportunities they so rightly deserve. So I want to thank you for the invitation to come today, and I will do my very, very, very best to serve you and to make you proud of Governor Quinn's selection. Thank you very much.